Okay, so now we're in question number 1 of the English test. Let's begin by reading the sentence as is. Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants since 1972, when she started the now famous Amboseli Elephant Research Project in Amboseli National Park in Kenya. Now what we're going to want to do is get rid of any of this unnecessary information. It really gets in the way of us understanding what the right answer may be by reading the sentence, because we'll be too focused on trying to say this unnecessary information, and I'll show you what I mean. Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants since 1972, when she started the now famous project in Kenya. Okay, that's much better. So let's say we're not really sure what the punctuation rules are, and we can't assess it from that perspective. What we're going to want to do is check this technique out. And this is where we find the most concise answer. The most concise answer is the one that has the least amount of punctuation or has the least amount of words. Next, we're going to want to subvocalize it. And subvocalization, that's where we read it out loud to ourselves and hear if it sounds smooth or if it sounds jarring. So let's begin with the first answer choice that would be the most concise. So answer choice A has 1 comma, answer choice B has 2, answer choice C has 1, answer choice D doesn't have any. But answer choice D has this apostrophe right here. Now that apostrophe indicates possession, plural possession actually. So if we were going to pick this as the most concise answer, because it doesn't have a comma, we would have to be prepared to understand if this apostrophe is necessary or not. Well, because it indicates possession, it should be mentioning something about what the elephant owns. Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants since 1972. Doesn't mention anything about ownership. If there was, I would see something like elephants, the elephant's home, or the elephant's children, something of that to that effect. But it doesn't say anything about what the elephant owns, therefore D would be incorrect because there's no possession. So let's find the next most concise answer, and it's a toss-up between A and C because they both have 1 comma. Now if you're not sure about your punctuation rules, subvocalization is going to be a very good technique here because we're going to hear how both of them sound and pick the one that sounds the best. Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants since 1972 when she started the now famous project in Kenya. Okay, so that's A. Now let's try C, where it puts the comma after 1972. Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants since 1972, when she started the now famous project in Kenya. Okay, which of those two sounds better? Right, C. C definitely sounds better than A. We used subvocalization. It sounds smooth, or at least smoother than A. And 80% of the time, that's going to get us to the right answer. So now what we're going to do is go through the punctuation rules and find out why A and B are going to be incorrect. So the first rule we're going to want to know is that a comma separates an independent clause from a dependent clause. Now an independent clause is a complete thought. It's sort of a complete sentence, you could say. I could put a period at the end of an independent clause. It would make sense there. But a dependent clause, that is not a complete thought. I could not put a period at the end of a dependent clause and have it stand alone. And I'll show you what I mean. Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants since 1972. Do you see how this right here is a complete thought? I could technically put a period right there, and it would stand alone as a sentence. So that's how I know this is the beginning and the ending of the independent clause. Now, this choice right here, when she started the now famous project in Kenya, now that does not sound like a complete thought. It's not a standalone sentence. It's as if I'm waiting for some more information. The trick here is this word when up front. When she started the now famous project in Kenya. So I know this is going to be the beginning of my dependent clause. And how do we separate independent clauses from dependent clauses? Well, we put commas in between them. Now this is the first rule of commas that I want you to memorize. Commas go between independent clauses and dependent clauses. Another way to think about it is it goes between essential information and non-essential information. It's the way the author lets us know what's important and maybe just not, and what is not as important in order to understand the meaning of the sentence. Okay, so from this perspective, we would see that the comma goes right here, not right here. But answer choice A puts the comma before the word since. Well, I just mentioned that commas separate out essential from non-essential information. Cynthia Moss has been studying elephants since 1972. That's essential. We need to know this in order to understand the context of this sentence. So this is going to have to go to the left of the comma. And that's how you're going to want to assess A, because the beginning of the independent clause and the end of the independent clause would be from Cynthia to 1972. Okay, so that's why A would be incorrect. It puts the comma in the wrong place. It inappropriately separates the essential from the non-essential information. We want to correctly assess where the independent clause begins and ends and where the dependent clause begins and ends. Next is answer choice B. Notice how answer choice B has two commas. So this is the next comma rule that I want you to memorize. And this is what's called a parenthetical reference, and you're going to want to memorize that. So it's parenthetical. And that's just a big fancy word that means I'm separating out non-essential information in the middle of a clause, and that's why we have two commas. So right now, this information, 1972, we know it's essential, so it doesn't need commas. But in this case, even if it wasn't essential, it would be at the end of the sentence, not in the middle of the clause. Sorry, at the end of the clause, not in the middle of the clause. In the middle of the clause would be as if it was starting right here, Cynthia Moss, comma, and then this line right here is just where we put since 1972. Cynthia Moss, comma, since 1972, comma, has been studying elephants. This would be an appropriate place to put a parenthetical phrase or non-essential information. But they didn't do that. It's at the end of the clause, so therefore we wouldn't want to separate it out with two commas. Now, just for reference, we don't need two commas to separate out parenthetical phrases. We could put two M dashes, or dashes for short, or two parentheses. So I want you to write that down too. We could use two commas, two dashes, or two parentheses. So answer choice B is incorrect. And that leaves us again with answer choice C, which correctly separates the independent clause from the dependent clause with a comma. Okay, so let's run through the steps that we started at from the beginning. The first thing we did is we simplified the sentence, and that allowed us to read through the sentence without having to worry about not knowing how it sounds, because the sentence was too long and filled with unnecessary information. Next, we used a technique called concision and subvocalization. Concision is where we find the shortest answer, or the answer with the least amount of punctuation. Then we subvocalize it to hear how it sounds. If that answer sounds smooth 80% of the time, that's going to get us to the right answer. Next, we went through our our rules with apostrophes. This is plural possession, which means multiple elephants owning something. We established that there was no ownership in here, so D was incorrect. Then we went through a couple of rules, comma rules that you need to memorize. The first is commas separate out independent clauses from dependent clauses, or you could say essential information from non-essential information. And we correctly assessed that the comma would need to go here, because this is where the end of the independent clause is and the beginning of the dependent clause. Lastly, we went through parenthetical phrases or parenthetical references, and how that separates out non-essential information with two commas, or two M dashes, or two parentheses, but that it would be in the middle of a clause, not at the end of the clause, in which case you might expect that right here, right after Cynthia Moss and before the verb has. And that's not the case in this sentence, so B is incorrect. And that leaves us again with answer choice C. Thank you.